Nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee, e'en though it be a cross that raiseth me, still all my songs shall be nearer, my God, to thee, nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee.
Heartfelt religion is what we're talking about, and that's having to do with getting nearer to God. But how do we go about doing that? As always, we want to let the Bible tell us about that. Say it with me, Psalm 118, verse 24, "This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." Remember Hebrews 3 and verse 13, "But exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin." We began this a couple of studies ago, and I want to continue thinking with you about the idea of heartfelt religion. When we introduced this, we made the comparison between someone relying on external stimuli, lights and music and all these kinds of things to make them feel close to God, as opposed to reading the Word of God, doing the things that God asks, which He says, "If you love me, keep my commandments," doing those things, and then as a result of doing those things, knowing that we're close to God. Big difference. And so I hope that you took the time to listen and investigate from the scriptures those first two studies. And so we'll try to continue on from there now. We're going to be going to John chapter 4 today as we talk about worship. Worship has its beginning very early in the Bible, I suppose. Genesis chapter 4, where Cain and Abel bring their offerings. We know that worship is going on there. And we also, as some people seem to just skip right over, we also learn from Cain and Abel that God just doesn't accept all kinds of worship, that He expects us to worship Him according to faith in what He directs us. So that being said, I want us to go over to John chapter 4, and maybe I'll just kind of quickly zoom through the beginning of this to set up the context, because really about verse 20 is what I want to get to. But we're going to hopefully pick up the context as we get to verse 20. John chapter 4, let's go down to verse 5. "He came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, 'Give me a drink.'" And of course, this sets up this conversation that a lot of times we just refer to as the woman at the well. Jesus, a Jew, talking to a Samaritan woman about water. And it's a discussion that leads to worship. Notice with me in verse 9, "The woman of Samaria said to him, 'How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans.'" And Jesus talks to her about living water, and that's something that she wants. Of course, she doesn't understand all the ramifications of what Jesus is saying. He says that though in verse 13, those who drink the water from the well will just get thirsty again, but he has a kind of water that will alleviate thirst forever. And he proves to her that he is indeed a prophet when he tells her information about her past, the fact that she's had 5 husbands and the person that she has now is not her husband, and convinces her that he truly is a prophet, but later he'll positively identify himself as not just a prophet, but the prophet and the Messiah, the Christ, the anointed one who was to come. And so I want you to notice part of this is in verse 20, the woman of Samaria says, our fathers worshiped on this mountain. And you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship. So Samaritans and Jews had a fundamental difference in that aspect, that regard, where worship is to take place. Jesus, though, gives her much more than these 2 options to think about. In verse 21, Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. So verse 23 is really an important verse if you're ever going to talk or think about worship. The woman was thinking about a place, and Jesus was saying the important thing, the important place is the heart. It's not this mountain or Jerusalem, it's the heart. So you will worship him where? You will worship the Father not in Jerusalem, not in this mountain. You will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. That's something that it's really a phenomenal passage if we just stop and think about the contrast that Jesus sets up there. It's not a place, it's a place of mind. It's a place of attitude. It's a place of heart. So that's what worship is all about. And worship is an action taken by a person, okay? It has to be. The fact that a rock exists is not worship. Animals do not worship. People made in the image of God worship. Now, they don't always worship correctly, and they don't even always worship God, but people worship, and God longs to commune with his people, and his people should long to commune with him. So worship, the basic etymology of the word means worthship. So when you're doing something to show some deity, it's worthship. And God, the only true and living deity, asks for us to show his worthship. And we do that by obeying his commands about how he wants to be worshiped, in this case in spirit and in truth. So number one, it requires an object of worship. We don't always get that right. In fact, you should notice Isaiah chapter 2, as God has commissioned Isaiah to speak to his people, Judah. Notice what he says there. In Isaiah chapter 2, the word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And I want us to go ahead and go down to verse 5, the day of the Lord. O house of Jacob, come and let us walk in the light of the Lord, for you have forsaken your people. So you notice the switch between verse 5 and verse 6, the prophet speaking to the people in verse 5. But in verse 6, he now turns his attention to the God of Jacob, the God of Israel. For you, God, have forsaken your people, Israel, the house of Jacob, because they are filled with eastern ways. Now, according to which translation you're reading, that will read differently, but it basically means you have taken on the ways of the people of the East, and in particular, the religious ways. He says they are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they are pleased with the children of foreigners. Their land is also full of silver and gold, and there's no end to their treasures. Their land is also full of horses, and there's no end to their chariots. Now look at verse 8. Their land is also full of idols. They worship the work of their hands, that which their own fingers have made. People bow down, and each man humbles himself. Therefore, do not forgive them. I tell you, it's scary to read that because it hits way, way, way too close to home. And I think about this country, this great country that I live in, that I've been in my entire life, that was founded upon the God of heaven, and how she has deserted our God. That was the message of Isaiah to Judah, and that history is bound to repeat itself when we don't learn the lesson there. Judah, the people of Israel, had misdirected their worship. Man's worship is to be directed toward God, and what they were doing is worshiping useless things. We can't make God, and they were worshiping things that they made. I want you to notice with me also over in Romans 1, beginning in verse 21, what was the sin of the Jews? Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. You see, they had begun to worship that which is not deserving of worship. Jesus told Satan that there is a very, very narrow window of worship. In Luke chapter 4, beginning in verse 5, as Satan was tempting the Son of God, it says, "Then the devil, taking him up on a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said to him, All this authority I will give you, and their glory, for this has been delivered to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you will worship before me, all will be yours." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Get behind me, Satan, for it is written, You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve." And you'll notice that there is a footnote there from Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 13. "You shall fear the Lord your God and serve him, and shall take oaths in his name." And that is necessarily exclusive. And Jesus showed us that it's necessarily exclusive, and it excludes all others that we would worship. You know, if you talk to people, the Muslim religion has become very popular in the United States. And some claim that Allah is just another name for God, and that when they worship Allah, they're just doing the same thing that Christians are when they worship God. Nothing could be further from the truth. The God of the Muslims is not the God of Christianity. And all you have to do is take a look at the attributes of each God. Allah says that it's perfectly fine for Muslims' adherents to lie, for example, to an infidel, an unbeliever, whereas God says that his people are never to lie. It's never okay to lie, no matter who you're talking to, that it must be truth at all times. And there's a lot of other comparisons that can be made. The God of the New Age movement, Gaia, is a falsehood, and it cannot be worshipped along with the real God, the reality, the Father in heaven. Even the God of the Mormons, though they would pretend that it is the same God of the Bible, it's a God based upon the figment of Joseph Smith's imagination. And it is not the God of the Bible, the great I am. So when it comes to worship, while some people think it's just this emotional response that is triggered by external things, it's certainly not. As we've seen, it comes from reading and learning and knowing God's will, and it must be based upon God, the one and only true God of heaven, being the object of our worship. You want to think more about these things, talk more about them, you be sure and get in contact with us. Use the comment section in Facebook or YouTube, or use Facebook Messenger, or send an email, and we'd be glad to talk to you more. Better yet, just come and see us and talk to us in person. We meet at 514 Airport Road. If you want to come and be with us in person, we're here on Sunday, 10, 11, and 6, and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. You're always invited to come and be with us. There is no one excluded. Everyone is welcome at the Stone Ridge Church of Christ. Hey, until next time, if the Lord allows us to live and we have another opportunity, I hope that you have a great day, that you'll make the one and only true God the object of your true worship.